Let me settle one of the most common little arguments in the grocery store, one that happens quietly in 1,000 minds every day, often without a single word spoken aloud. You have likely had it yourself, while standing there in front of the egg case, your hand hovering between two cartons, one full of white eggs and the other full of brown. And if you have stood there long enough, you have probably noticed the thing that nudges so many folks in one direction before they have even thought the matter through. The brown eggs so often cost a little more. They look a little homier, a little earthier, a little more like something gathered fresh from a wooden nest box on an old farm. And because they look that way, a great many people come to the same conclusion without ever meaning to. They assume the brown eggs must be healthier, better somehow, more natural, more nourishing, a richer egg in every way, and therefore worth the extra money. So they reach for the brown carton feeling they have made the wiser choice, the cleaner choice, maybe even the more old-fashioned and wholesome choice. But I want to tell you plainly that this is exactly where almost everyone gets it wrong. The real difference between brown eggs and white eggs is not the difference most people think it is. It is not a difference in virtue. It is not a difference in nutrition by shell color alone. It is not a difference in moral purity, or in how natural the egg is, or in whether the hen was somehow more lovingly raised. The shell color itself does not tell you the goodness of the egg inside, not at all. And the true reason one egg comes out white, while another comes out brown, rests on such a simple little fact that once you hear it, you may wonder how this confusion held on for so long. It comes down, in the plainest sense, to the kind of hen that laid it. And if that sounds too simple, stay with me, because there is more tucked inside this than most people ever stop to notice. There is even one little sign on a chicken herself that can often tell you what color eggs she is likely to lay. And there is another small surprise hidden inside the shell of a brown egg that most people do not discover until someone points it out. And then there is the practical question, the one every shopper wants answered once the myth has been cleared away. If the brown egg is not better simply because it is brown, why does it so often cost more? I come to this not as someone guessing from the outside, but as someone who has spent enough time around hens, nests, feed, shells, yolks, and egg baskets to know how far common opinion can drift from plain truth. Anyone who has gathered eggs with his own hands for long enough learns that the shell is the first thing people notice, and often the least important thing about the egg. You can hold a basket with white eggs, brown eggs, speckled eggs, even the occasional blue or green one if you keep the right birds. And all at once, you are looking at how easily the human eye mistakes appearance for meaning. We are drawn to color. We are drawn to texture. We are drawn to whatever looks more old-fashioned and real. And from there we begin telling ourselves stories about quality before we have any right to. So today let me walk you through the whole thing carefully and in order. What actually decides whether an egg is brown or white? Why so many people attach health value to the shell color when they should not? Why the inside of a brown eggshell can teach you something in a moment if you only stop to look? Why the price at the store is often different even when the basic goodness inside is not. And finally, what truly does matter if you want to choose a better egg and not merely a prettier shell. Because there is a real difference hidden in this subject, only it is not the one most people spend their money on. Now let me begin with the plain central truth, the one that puts the whole matter back on its feet. The color of an egg's shell is determined primarily by the breed of the hen that laid it. That is the beginning of it, and in many ways the end of it as well. A hen of one breed is likely to lay white eggs. A hen of another breed is likely to lay brown ones. Some special breeds lay blue eggs or greenish ones. But the point is this: the shell color is not a direct verdict on nutrition. It is not a badge of superior healthfulness. It is not a certificate that one hen lived a better life simply because the egg she laid came wrapped in brown. This is where almost everyone gets turned around. They see brown and imagine pasture. They see white and imagine factory. They see a deeper, earthier color, and they connect it in their minds with something more natural, and therefore more worthy. But shell color by itself does not tell you those things. A brown egg can come from a hen kept poorly. A white egg can come from a hen kept well. A brown egg can be ordinary. A white egg can be excellent. The shell color does not carry that story for you, no matter how badly we want the outside to tell us everything at a glance. And here is the charming little fact that makes this whole subject far more memorable than people expect. If you spend time around chickens, one of the old rules of thumb you may hear is that a hen's earlobes can often give you a clue about the shell color she is likely to lay. Most folks do not even know a chicken has earlobes, but she does. A small patch just below the ear opening on the side of her head. And while nature always allows for exceptions, the old barnyard rule is still a useful one. Hens with white earlobes often lay white eggs. Hens with reddish earlobes often lay brown eggs. It is one of those delightful little facts that sounds made up until you see enough birds for yourself and realize it has been sitting there in plain sight all along. It does not make the egg better. It simply helps explain the packaging. Now, once you understand that shell color is bound up with breed, the next question follows almost immediately. Fine then, if the shell color is chiefly a matter of the bird, how does that color get there in the first place? Is the shell brown all the way through? Is the whole thing built from brown material from the beginning? And here is where the second surprise enters, the one that makes people stop in the middle of the kitchen when they see it with their own eyes. For most of the time that a hen is forming an egg, the shell being made is fundamentally the same pale mineral shell, regardless of whether the finished egg will look white or brown from the outside. The shell material itself is built up over time, and in hens that lay brown eggs, the brown coloration is added near the end of the process as a pigment coating on the surface. In other words, the brown color is not the whole substance of the shell from top to bottom in the way many people imagine. It is, in a very real sense, a finishing color laid over what began as the same sort of pale shell. And you can see the truth of that in your own kitchen tonight if you wish. Crack a brown egg, and before you throw the shell away, turn one half over and look closely at the inside. What you will notice is that the inner surface is pale, white, or near enough to it to make the point unmistakable. The brown is chiefly on the outside. That alone should settle much of the mystery for a careful person. The color that so strongly influences buying decisions is only skin deep, and that is not a figure of speech here. It is literally a surface distinction. Now I want to pause on that for a moment, because this is where the misunderstanding becomes most interesting. So many people are persuaded by shell color because the shell is the part they can see. They cannot see the feed. They cannot see the bird's living conditions. They cannot see freshness. They cannot see how old the egg is, or how well the flock was managed, or whether the bird had a good varied diet. Those things are mostly hidden, but the shell is right there in front of them, visible and immediate, and so the mind reaches for the visible sign and turns it into a story about the invisible truth. We do this with food all the time. We do it with labels. We do it with rustic packaging. We do it with color. We do it with whatever seems to whisper that it came from a better place and therefore must be better in itself. That is why almost everyone gets this wrong. Not because they are foolish, but because the human mind is forever tempted to use appearance as a shortcut. Brown looks more natural, so we tell ourselves brown must be better. But an egg does not become more nourishing because the shell happens to wear a darker coat. The goodness of an egg is not printed on its outer wrapping like a simple little stamp for the hurried shopper. You have to look beyond the shell if you want the truth. And there is a plain life lesson sitting quietly inside all of this, one worth noticing because it stretches well beyond eggs. The world trains people to trust surfaces. It always has. The prettier fruit, the more artful label, the richer color, the more expensive package, the more carefully aged-looking carton. We are forever invited to believe that appearance is evidence. And sometimes appearance tells you something useful, but just as often it tells you only what the outside looks like, not the substance, not the worth, not the real quality within. A brown egg and a white egg are a fine little reminder that the eye is quick to judge, and often quick to judge wrongly. Now let me come to the question that always follows once people have made peace with that first truth. If the shell color does not make the egg inherently better, why then are brown eggs so often priced higher at the store? Why does the carton that so many people choose for health reasons also happen to cost more? That seems, on the surface, to confirm the very myth we have just taken apart. After all, people reason, surely if it costs more, there must be something superior about it. But the answer is much less glamorous than people expect, and far more practical. Brown egg-laying breeds are often larger birds than the highly efficient white egg-laying breeds used so commonly in large-scale egg production. A larger bird generally eats more feed and requires more resources to maintain. More feed going in means a higher cost to the producer, and that cost can show up in the price of the eggs. So when you pay more for brown eggs, what you are often paying for is not a more virtuous shell or a more nutritious egg by color alone, but the economics of keeping a different kind of bird. That is the part almost nobody thinks about while standing there with a carton in hand. They think the higher price must be payment for superior nourishment. Very often it is not. Very often, it is simply the cost of the hen herself being a larger, hungrier creature to keep. The extra money reflects production realities more than nutritional magic. The shell has become expensive in the public imagination for one reason and expensive at the register for another, and people blend those two ideas together without realizing it. Now let me be careful here, because this is where people can oversimplify in the other direction. Once they learn that shell color itself is not the quality marker, they sometimes swing too far and conclude that all eggs are therefore equal in every way. That is not true either. There are real differences between eggs. They are just not dictated by brown versus white. The difference you ought to care about, if you care about the goodness of the egg, lies in how the hen was fed, how she was managed, how healthy she was, how stressed or unstressed her life may have been, and how fresh that egg is when it reaches you. A well-kept hen, fed a sound diet and given conditions suited to a healthy bird, can produce a better egg whether the shell comes out white or brown. The yolk may be richer, the flavor may be better, the overall eating quality may be better. On the other hand, a poorly managed flock can give you a lesser egg no matter how lovely the shell looks from the outside. This is the real place where a careful shopper ought to train his attention, not on shell color first, but on the standards behind the egg. And that distinction matters because it rescues you from paying for symbolism when what you actually want is substance. If you want a more nutritious egg, a fresher egg, a better tasting egg, then ask questions that reach the life of the hen rather than the color of the shell. How were the birds raised? What were they fed? How fresh are the eggs? What standards does the farm or producer keep? Those questions go to the heart of the matter. The shell color does not. Now there is another reason this brown versus white confusion has survived so stubbornly, and it has to do with the way the eye and the conscience sometimes work together. A brown egg looks as if it came from a simpler world. That matters to people. Many are tired of food that feels over-processed, over-marketed, over-handled, too far removed from the farm. So when they see a brown egg, they read into it an entire story of simplicity and honesty. They imagine straw, open air, sturdy hens, family farms, and good old ways. The shell becomes a kind of symbol, and because the symbol feels comforting, they mistake it for proof. But symbols are slippery things. Sometimes they point toward reality. Sometimes they only borrow its costume. That is why a wise person learns to separate what looks wholesome from what is wholesome. And this little lesson with eggs is one of the clearest examples of that you could ask for, because the visible sign is so convincing and yet so incomplete. A person who understands this goes into the store differently. He is not dazzled by the shell. He is not dismissive of brown eggs either. He simply refuses to give the shell credit for virtues it has not earned. If the brown eggs came from well-kept birds, good. If the white eggs did too, good. Let the shell be what it is, an outer covering, and let the real judgment fall where it belongs, on the actual conditions that shaped the egg. And I think there is something satisfying about that, because it puts common sense back in the driver's seat. It reminds us that truth is often simpler than marketing, and simpler too than our own habits of assumption. We love a visible shortcut. We want to believe quality can be read instantly from color and surface. But again and again, life asks a little more patience from us than that. It asks us to look beneath the obvious sign. The brown egg and the white one sit there beside each other, teaching that lesson to anyone willing to slow down long enough to learn it. Now, before I finish, let me gather the real matter into a few plain conclusions so there is no confusion left in it. Brown eggs are not automatically healthier than white eggs simply because they are brown. White eggs are not inferior simply because they are white. Shell color is primarily a trait tied to the breed of the hen. In hens that lay brown eggs, the brown coloration is laid onto the shell near the end of the formation process. That is why the inside of a brown shell appears pale when you crack it open. The higher store price that often follows brown eggs usually reflects production differences, especially the kind of bird laying them, not a mystical rise in the goodness of the egg itself. And if you want to judge real quality, you must turn your mind to the life of the hen, the feed, the care, the freshness, and the standards behind the carton. That is the truth of it, and it is enough to save a great many people from confusing appearance with value. It is also enough, I think, to make a trip down the grocery aisle a little more interesting than it was before. Because once you know what to look for, those two cartons no longer present a mystery of healthfulness. They present a small lesson in how easily the eye can mislead the judgment. And I would be curious to know how many of you have believed this all your lives without ever stopping to question it. Did you assume the brown eggs were the healthier choice? Did you ever pay more for them thinking the shell itself meant something better was waiting inside? And if you crack a brown egg after this and notice that pale inner shell for the first time, I hope you will remember just how much of the story was being carried by the outside alone. For those of you who keep hens of your own, I would be glad to hear what your flock lays and whether people are always more impressed by the color of the shell than by the actual quality of the eggs in the basket. It would not surprise me one bit if many of you have had to explain this very thing to visitors more than once. And let me say one more thing before I leave you. There is a reason ordinary objects so often hold the best lessons. We hurry past them because they are common. A carton of eggs is common. A shell is common. A color difference at the store is common. And yet hidden inside that ordinary little choice is a reminder that the eye loves appearances, and truth often lives one layer deeper. Once you start seeing that, the world grows fuller. You begin to notice that many of the misunderstandings people carry are not born from malice or stupidity at all, but from the simple human habit of letting the visible stand in for the real. So the next time you are in the store and your hand hovers between the brown carton and the white one, you will know better than most. You will know that shell color alone is not the secret people imagine it to be. You will know that the outside tells only a small part of the story. You will know that the real difference most people miss is not some hidden superiority of the brown shell, but the fact that they were judging the egg by the wrong thing in the first place. And if you would choose wisely, you will look past the wrapping and ask about the life behind it, because that is where the true difference has always lived. And next time, since today we have been talking about the shell and the way it fools the eye, I want to show you another little marvel about eggs that surprises nearly everyone the first time they really think about it. How something as thin as an eggshell can be fragile enough to crack on the rim of a bowl and yet strong enough, under the right pressure, to resist the grip of a whole hand. It sounds contradictory until you understand how the shape and structure work together. And once you do, you will never look at an egg the same way again. Until then, remember this simple truth. Brown or white, the shell is only the shell. And if you want the real story, you must always look a little deeper than the color of the outside.